topic of the conversation today is the role of intent. So that is what I'll try to speak to you in the next few minutes about. Before I dive into the details of that particular topic and talk about my models and thought process and all of that, I would like all of us to think of a particular scenario. If you can think of a recent big purchase that you might have made. It doesn't need to be a house or a car or anything as big as that. Maybe something more than £100 or $100 or equivalent value. So if you can please take a minute to think about a recent purchase of some significant value on which you had to think a little bit before you actually gave your credit card or put the details in the online portal and actually made that purchase. So think for a moment. Okay. So let us say the product that you bought is product A. As you went through the purchase process of buying this product A, you might have compared it with few other products. You might have looked at some other options, but you ultimately went for this product A. And in this selection process, there might have been a close second, the one that you didn't buy, but it was quite close. Let us call that product B. So you had both product A as well as product B in your consideration. But what is it that made you select product A versus product B? So the intent was there on both, right? However, that intent converted to action only in the case of product A, and the poor product B was kept wanting there. So what happened? Take a moment to think of the reasons why the intent in the case of product A converted to action. Why did you buy that product? Okay, you might have a few reasons. It could potentially be price. It could be that is the latest craze in the market. That is something that all of your friends have. That is something, your neighbors down the road have recently bought and they're raving about it. This particular product has fantastic reviews. So there could be many multiple reasons. If I was to boil down all of those reasons into one word, what do you think that word might be? That word is relevance. The reason you bought product A, the reason your intent converted to action in the case of product A was because it felt more relevant to you. The relevance of that was much higher than the relevance of all others, and specifically with regards to the relevance of product B because it was close second. So it is this relevance which ultimately led you from intent to action. Now, if you are the owner of this product B, you might be thinking that how can I potentially understand how this relevance works? How can I make my product or service more relevant so that is picked instead of anything else? So here in this scenario, we are talking about products and what you bought, but this applies to many other factors of life, which I will come to. But let us stay with our friends from product B and product A at the moment. So what is it? If you wanted to know that what is driving this relevance, which led to intent and then intent to action, how would they find that out? A key foundational factor that drives relevance is belief. it is the beliefs that we have, maybe as they were ingrained in us as we were growing up, or as part of the peer groups we belong to, or other friends that we have, the society we were in. So there could be multiple factors which make our belief system. And to a great extent, it is that belief, the structure of the belief system, that drives relevance. Here you see we talk about a two-way journey between belief and relevance. So of course, belief drives relevance, but in many cases, as relevance changes, it can potentially change beliefs as well. However, it is not that easy to change beliefs. They are changeable, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But at a very basic level, beliefs are who we are. So I'm a Hindu. I cannot eat beef. That is part of my belief system. It doesn't matter if it is the world's best manufacturer of beef, offers me a fantastic steak in a, Michelin 3-star restaurant. It doesn't matter to me because that is not part of who I am. So there are beliefs which are very difficult to change. However, there are beliefs which can be changed. So let us come to this point around relevance. Of course, beliefs drive relevance, and it will be important for the owner of product B to understand if there are any beliefs that he can influence that can drive a change in relevance. There is another very important factor which influences or makes a change in what is relevant or what is not relevant, and that is our external environment. There are a lot of external forces which impact us on a daily basis, on a regular basis, periodic basis. We've all lived through, and I guess still living through, this pandemic. A lot of things that were not relevant to us in the past are very relevant now. I'm a very social person. I like to go out and meet people. Did not quite like Zoom calls that much, but given the external factors we've all been exposed to, Zoom meetings are part of our life. They are very relevant. Likewise, there are many other things which have happened over the past year, which have changed what is relevant and what is not relevant for many people. So that is all good. You might be thinking that is all good. We have belief which is driving relevance. We have external factors which are driving relevance. So how can we use that to help us drive intent? We all have multiple small children within us. If someone wants to change relevance or be relevant to a person, a being, what they need to do is to understand what drives these small children that are within each of us. They are driven by, some of them are driven by ambition, some of them are driven by a sense of belonging, some of them are driven by, search for happiness. So there are multiple factors that the small children within us, get motivated by. So it is by finding these points of relevance is what whoever wants to be in the consideration set, so that whatever they want someone to intend and take action on need to appeal to. And this is where from intent is there. So more stronger the relevance is, that is something that will lead to intent. Stronger the intent, that is what would lead to action. So if we don't have relevance, we don't get intent. If we don't have a strong enough intent, that doesn't lead to action. You might have heard of that saying that road to hell is paved with good intentions. Why do you think it is said like that? Because it is all well and good to have good intentions, but if they don't convert to action, that doesn't get us nirvana or, our version of heaven or whatever happiness or, that ultimate achievement feels to you like. So So it is this journey, of the strength of relevance to intent to action. Now, this is something that applies to multiple ways of our lives. Let us think of children. I have a 15-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter who is actually sitting in the audience here with me today. So, we as parents, we want them to do many things. We want them to have a strong intent so that they take action, whether it is in their studies or in the sports that they do. But if we just keep on dictating to them what we think is right without making it relevant to them, do you think they will have a strong intent? Up to a certain extent, maybe, but not, I believe, strong enough that it would lead to action all the time. Think about organizations. Organizations want their employees to have a strong intent on multiple areas so that they can drive the business of the organization forward. In my business, we work with many multinational organizations across the world. And that is a key question they ask us. How do we drive intent? My friends, the first thing to do is, how can you make what you want them to do feel more relevant to them? Out of our Indian office, we have an employee, Ashish. He's completes 10 years with us in September this year. So, up until 4, maybe 3 years ago, what drove relevance for him and what drove intent and then ultimately action for him was very different because, he was a bachelor. Now he's married, he's got a 2-year-old daughter. What is relevant to him now is very different to what was relevant 4 years ago. So if we, as people running an organization, do not understand what that relevance is or what drives an individual, it is very difficult to then drive intent and action. In the world of education, I also teach part-time at the university here. If we don't understand what makes it relevant for our students, if we just teach them theory without linking it to what works in the real world, I teach marketing, which is a very dynamic subject. Details in marketing keep changing all the time. If in my education, in my lectures, what I am talking to them is from a textbook 7 years ago, do you think that will help them move forward? I have literally just marked a lot of marketing consultancy assignments in the past few days. Some of them have been absolutely out of this world. And as a teacher, there's nothing better than that. And I feel sort of, because what we talked about in our classes, in our breakout rooms, was more relevant to what worked for them. Hopefully that led to intent and action. And that is what we hope, that is what they will do and change the world as they move forward. In the world of politics, so in the UK, recently we had this situation where huge, let us call it colors, huge walls of a particular political color were changed, let's say from red to blue or whatever. How do you think that happened? Because the message was on point. The message was relevant to these people who changed potentially their obligation from one color to another color. So in many facets of life, this is how intent is driven to action, through having strong relevance. Let us look at some practical commercial examples as well. In the world of sales, there is this interesting concept of features versus benefits. So let's say there is this electrical appliances manufacturing company bringing a new electrical toaster into the market. And, on one hand, it talks to you about the features that, it has got, the wire has got triple strong protection, the metal is anodized, Do you think that is something that will sort of drive you to buy that product? Or versus that, if they talk about benefits, which is this toaster will give you the crunchiest toast, the nutrients are retained, the taste is the best ever? Or would the benefits drive your decision or make it more attractive to you? I would hope it is the benefits, because that is what is more relevant to us. That is what we relate to more strongly. In the world of marketing, there is this important concept which people from the world of marketing will know, the AIDA model, which is awareness, interest, desire, action. So of course, you need awareness to let your target audience know for your product or service. But then how do you drive intent? You drive intent, again, by making your product or service relevant to the target audience. And that is what leads to a stronger intent or desire. And then ultimately, that is what leads to action. In the world of law, a key difference between murder and manslaughter is potentially the role of intent, how strong the intent was. In many geographies where it is juries who decide in terms of if someone is guilty or not, there is something called an objective test, which is what would a reasonable person think? So a reasonable person would base their understanding on understanding the facts and trying to ascertain whether they were relevant to a particular situation or not. So again, sort of, relevance plays a very big role here. So I have used a few examples, and you can apply it to many different situations in your life and in your environment. So it is ultimately this belief driving relevance, the power of relevance driving intent. Only if intent is powerful would it lead to action. And this BRIA model, BRIA, sort of comes to life and hopefully can drive and help us have a strong intent which can convert to action. So my friends, go find relevance, be relevant, stay relevant.